Hi, I'm Lee, and welcome to my studio and YouTube channel where I discuss tips, tricks, and techniques for oil and acrylic painters. In this video, we'll explore green paints available to artists. Okay, so let's move out of our primaries and into our secondaries. This is, so let's look at our green family. So we have Phthalo Green, Phthalo Emerald or Emerald Green, Permanent Green Light, which is a mixture. Every manufacturer has their own. Sap Green, another mixture that every manufacturer kind of makes their own. Then we can move over to Viridian and Terre Verte. Let's take a look at the green family. All right, so let's explore these paints. Over here we have, we're going to do our tints. This is just, we're going to do a mixture of titanium white with a pile of paint, see what they look like with our tints. Over here, we're going to draw down and get our transparencies and see how they look in glazes and whatnot. Let's get started on Phthalo Green. So as you get down into it, we start to see that just like its blue, blue cousin, this is a very potent, very powerful, high tinting green color. It's a nice cool color, very rich, very saturated as we draw it into our titanium whites. This is great for like pine trees and whatnot. But as we get into the yellow shade over here, you'll see a big difference between why we have a yellow shade and a blue shade. And just because of how powerful it is, you might want to knock it back a little bit with the opposite, a red, to kind of help it neutralize. Okay, so let's move on to our emerald green. Now this particular pile that I have is not quite, it's an alkyd, so it doesn't have as much pigment as the phthalo green over on the left side of it. I just didn't feel like buying another tube of paint for for this exercise, but you can kind of see already that how much warmer and how much more yellow is in this. Let's go ahead and add a little extra paint in there so we can kind of get our pigment levels up to the same density. See if we can't get a little more value. Similarities in value. Yeah. All right, here we go. Now you can start to really see that it's a much more yellow by comparison than the blue, the bluish green of the standard phthalo green. Kind of feel like this green is a little more natural than the phthalo blue or phthalo green here. There's nothing wrong with either one of these, but I just feel like this one's a little more natural, and you can always add a little more phthalo blue to give this a little more of a cooler cast, and then you can obviously add yellow to really brighten and green it up. Yeah, I think this one's just a little bit more forgiving than the one on the left there. So here's our two phthalos that you can kind of play around with, the phthalo blue shade and phthalo yellow shade. All right, so let's move on to permanent green light. Now, permanent green light it's a convenience color just because it's already pre-mixed for us. This is now typically every manufacturer makes their own sort of variation on it, but typically it'll be a yellowish green that is a sort of a mid-value green, and it's really nice to work with. If you look over here on our glaze areas, you'll see that it's it's a mid-value compared to the rest of them straight out of the tube. But it's really nice because you can just throw a little bit of titanium white in it, and you already have a really nice grassy green just from the get-go. I wouldn't necessarily recommend these greens, any of these greens really, if you're just starting out. I would absolutely highly recommend a split primary, just so you can kind of understand the pigments and how they work with each other before adding secondary paints. But as soon as you move into that, where you're looking for greens to work with on your palette, a nice, wonderful convenience color like a permanent green light is a great way to go. Well, let's move on to Sap Green. Okay, so Sap Green, another convenience color that every manufacturer will sort of have their own mix or flavor, if you will. Now, as opposed to a permanent green light, where it's a nice saturated yellow sunny color, Sap Green will be more of an olive color. It'll be darker. It'll be great for like the shadows of grass or tree leaves, foliage. It's not nearly as saturated as we can tell, usually speaking. Every manufacturer kind of makes their own, so I would usually it's a fairly inexpensive pigment like some of these others over here, fairly inexpensive, so play around with whichever manufacturer's Sap Green that you like. This particular one is Winsor Newton. I personally like, but no, I typically wouldn't use this as a tint. I use it more as a glaze, which will start. As we move over into our glazes, we'll start to see the Sap Green come to its true fruition by comparison to these other colors. So now let's move into some a little more expensive pigments. So this one right here is Viridian. Now, very much like a cool phthalo blue. This one is it's a more expensive Series 4, Series 5 pigment, but it doesn't tint nearly as potently or as deeply as the phthalo blue over there on our left there. Yeah, so as we start to mix it up, you can kind of really see, like, it doesn't have a lot of tint strength. It's a very subtle green. Yeah, it's a very subtle. Let's add an extra little tube there just to show you, like, so. Here we go. Yeah, so you can see that it just doesn't have a lot of tint strength. So you can use this to your advantage, very much so, because you don't have to have nearly as much titanium white to get your value. Yeah, you can see just how much lighter it is, even with two piles of paint by comparison. Yeah, but as we continue to mix it, you can kind of see that it has a kind of a more natural greenish color to it. Nice green, natural green, as opposed to like a synthetic kind of green over here. This one seems a little more synthetic. This one seems a little more of a natural, like if you want to do specifically for landscapes. It'll be a lot easier to grade down for atmospheric perspective as you go back and further in the distance in a landscape. But yep, so this is our Viridian. Okay, so let's look at Terre Verte. Now, as we get started into Terre Verte, you'll notice that it does not have a lot of tint strength. I mean, oh wow, yeah, like so this is actually a Michael Harding tube of paint, and Michael Harding is a premium paint that is usually very highly pigmented and very little filler and whatnot. It's a professional, very high professional level grade of paint, and even in that line of paint, Terre Verte does not have as much tinting strength as the other greens. Yeah, it almost looks white. Let me look at the yep. Even on the camera, it looks very white. So it doesn't even look like I put any. Doesn't even look like I put it. Let's get some more. That's hilarious. There we go. Let's add a little bit more. All right, let's add a little bit more there. So, okay, well, we're starting to see a little bit more of that. We're getting a little closer there. But yeah, so moving along from the low tint value of this particular pigment. as you can see, that we're starting to go more olivey green. We're not nearly as blue as the ones over here. This really grayed down quite spectacularly, actually. And this isn't a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. This is actually could be very good for landscapes and whatnot. This would be great for, as opposed to phthalo blue, if you're trying to push atmospheric perspective. Yeah, so. All right, so let's move on to our transparencies. Okay, so let's look at our first one, which is Phthalo Green. As we draw it down, you can see just like its blue counterpart, it is a very, very transparent color. Very nice saturated color too. Phthalo Green is as a transparency. It's perfect for glazes. Let's say if you painted. Yeah, here, look how transparent that is. Yeah. So if you have a tree and it's a little too yellow, what you can do instead of getting like a blue, you use a phthalo green and do a slight glaze on top of that and really cool down your colors of the foliage of your tree, so it's not quite so warm or so yellow. And you can do that without adding like a blue or something. But yeah, you can definitely kind of see how the value changes as you draw it down. Yep, there we go. All right, so let's take a look at our Phthalo Emerald or Phthalo Green yellow shade. As the yellow shade is indicated, we have a very nice yellowish green on our glaze. Again, this is just a slightly different. This is a alkyd, so it has a little bit of a different pigment load than the phthalo next to it. The Phthalo Green next to it, but you can still see that it's a really nice, seems like a little more natural green compared to the phthalo green there. Again, it'd be good for glazing over like some grasses that are a little too yellow without having to paint over everything. So moving on to Permanent Green Light. As we can see now, because this is a semi transparent, so it's not quite. It doesn't have quite the transparency as our phthalos there, just because it's a mix with I think a semi-opaque paint, which is the Acrylic or Hansa or whatnot. So, but yeah, again, every manufacturer is different, so please make sure that you check your experiment with your Permanent Green Light before you apply it to your palette. So, all right, let's move on to Sap Green. Again, every manufacturer is different, but this particular one is going to be nice and very transparent, by comparison. So let's draw this down a little bit more. And you start to see, now you can start to see let's see how transparent, super transparent, just like our phthalos. Yeah, and so you start to see that nice kind of undergrowth green or swampy green in the glaze that is absolutely beautiful. That's kind of hard to get that luminosity and that saturation. Yeah, we'll draw it down a little bit more. Scumble this out a little bit. Yeah, look at that nice. It's a really nice, like I said, swampy undergrowth green. So yeah, you can see how it kind of just starts out super black on the pile. It's almost like a really nice dark, and then as we draw it down, we can really start to see that luminosity kicking in, just meaning that it has a nice saturated bright color in the glaze, by comparison to its tint. All right, so let's move on to our next one, which is Viridian right here. So yeah, it's another transparent paint, but as we pull down its transparency, you can see how the difference between the phthalo green versus this Viridian green, that it's has a much more has a natural cool green to it. Still very transparent, just like the phthalo, but it has a naturalness to it. It's not quite as synthetic. Yeah, let's pull this down a little bit more. Let's glaze this out, or scumble this out a little bit. Yeah. You know, we're again, as with, because of the green family, we're talking subtleties here. So, you know, you can definitely see like this one's just a little bit more synthetic versus this one. This one's almost more minty. That's not saying either one of these are bad. It's just you have to manage them slightly differently, just because of the other properties. Okay, so let's move on to Terre Verte. Now, as we've shown in Terre Verte as a tint, it does not have much tint strength at all by comparison. Let's see how it does as a glaze. So as we draw it down, there we go. Yeah, see how it has this really nice olivey color to it. Yeah, very similar to the Sap Green in hue, but it's just not nearly as saturated. And it's really, oh, see, here we go. It's even, yeah, so we can get some nice thin. Now, one of the things about Terre Verte, because it doesn't have a lot of tint strength, is you can actually use this for figure painting. When you're doing a grisaille, you can create a what's called a dead layer. And the dead layer is basically looks like the figure is dead because it's all green and pale, and that is your underpainting before you put on the reds and the browns and whatnot to give it the liveliness of it. So it's a unique way of painting the figure, but that's a topic for another time. But just so this is the green family, and we have many different options. We have low tinting, high tinting, we have yellow bias, blue biased, lots of mixes, single pigments, plenty to choose from. Here's just a handful. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.